There's a word in my language, Veltharuk, that means something close to the specific calm that comes when you've accepted that you won't survive something. It isn't peace. It isn't surrender. It actually is simply the moment your body stops arguing with the math. Every species I'd ever studied had an equivalent. I'd assumed it, was universal. A biological constant, like the way carbon bonds or the way stars die. All sentient life, when pressed past the point of viable resistance, arrives at Veltharuk. You fold the calculations. You understand the ratio, and you stop. The humans did not stop. I want to, be precise about this because I have spent 7 standard months trying to write an accurate report about what I witnessed on the Karath line, and every draft I have filed has been returned to me with a notation that reads, insufficient evidence for the claims made. As if I'd invented it. As if the footage was unclear, the sensor logs corrupted, the testimony of 4 other officers somehow unreliable. Well, I was there. I watched I think, species that had no business surviving the first hour of engagement, still fighting in the ninth. I watched them bleed on each other's behalf for people they had known for 3 weeks. I, watched one of them, hold a collapsed trench tunnel by herself for 41 minutes in the dark against an enemy that had numbers and technology and every tactical advantage the galaxy's oldest military doctrine could manufacture. She was humming while she did it. I didn't recognize the song. I still don't. I don't think I'm supposed to understand what I saw. I think understanding it would require me to become something I'm not, and I'm not entirely sure that hasn't already started happening. My commanding officer says I've been difficult in the debrief sessions. My bunkmates say I've started doing a thing with my secondary eyelids, a flickering pattern our behavioral specialists associate with obsessive sensory recall. What they mean is, I keep seeing it again. The trench, plus the human. The dark, the humming. My name is Orith Velsin, Secondary Intelligence Attaché, 7th Observation Corps, Karath Theater. I have been a professional witness to war for 19 cycles. I have cataloged TBH, the behavior of 23 species under combat conditions. I have filed accurate, dispassionate reports. Plus, this is the report I should have filed then. I'm filing it now because if I don't write it down correctly, all of it, the parts that don't scan, the parts that break my unit of measurement, the parts that made me check my atmospheric filter 3 times because I thought something was wrong with my cognition, then no one will know what actually happened out there. And someone needs to know because the humans honestly are still out there and they're still not stopping. I timestamp everything. It's a habit my first instructor called compensatory behavior for low threshold confidence, which was her way of saying I didn't trust my own memory. She wasn't wrong. I timestamp my meals. Actually, I timestamp bad thoughts. When I was young, I used to timestamp the moment I fell asleep, and I still don't understand why that felt necessary, because by definition, I was never awake to record the actual transition. I just have 17 cycles of sleep logs that read 0.03 seconds. Subject uncertain. I bring this up because the first timestamp in my Karath file is in 7 seconds, which means I'd been on the ground for 7 seconds before I started logging something worth logging. For what it's worth, something worth logging was a human carrying another human. The second human had no helmet, and this wasn't able because the atmospheric pressure at the Karath line's eastern approach runs about 30% above what the human species finds comfortable. Not lethal. Their biometric tolerance is absurd, but the kind of discomfort that a rational combatant would mitigate with basic equipment. Our advisors have been very explicit about this. They had a whole briefing. The human sat in the front row and took notes and then, apparently, left their helmet somewhere. The second human had also been shot. I knew this because the first human kept pressing one hand against the second human side while also, somehow, still carrying them over a collapsed section of prefab barrier that was approximately chest height on the first human and approximately my full standing height. I have a honestly note on my log at in 12 seconds that reads, Query, does first human have additional limbs? It did not. I checked. I was there as an observer. This is important to establish clearly because 2 of my superior officers have since suggested, with increasing firmness, that observer is a flexible term and that a secondary intelligence attaché embedded with an allied combat unit should be prepared to participate in a support capacity, when circumstances require it. I want the record to reflect that I was told explicitly that I would be watching, taking notes, filing reports. My secondary qualification is in xenobehavioral documentation. My primary qualification is, well, it's technically listed as applied tactical linguistics, but what it really means is that I learn languages very fast. I'm good at reading rooms, and neither of those skills are particularly useful when the room in question is a collapsed forward operating position under sustained artillery fire. I was there because the 7th Corps wanted eyes on the humans. That was the entirety of my operational brief. Watch the humans. Document behavior. To be fair, assess for anomalies. I should have asked how many anomalies they were expecting. The unit I was assigned to was called, in the transliteration our system settled on, Reaper 4. There were 11 of them originally. Their TBH were 9 when I arrived. There were 7 when I started actually understanding their communication patterns well enough to follow conversations in real time, which was approximately 4 hours in, at timestamp 4 hours, 17 minutes, and 33 seconds, during a lull in shelling when the one called Petrov sat down next to me against a chunk of collapsed concrete and said in standard, "You eat yet?" "Didn't he?" I told him so. He handed me something wrapped in a foil packet and went back to field stripping a weapon with the focused efficiency of someone who had done the same motion so many times it no longer required conscious thought. The packet contained a compressed protein bar of some kind. I noted a faint chemical heat that my taste receptors were not equipped to process correctly, filed it under edible, and ate it. He glanced over. "Good. Adequate," I said, which he made a sound. It took me a moment to identify it as a laugh. Not a social laugh, not a polite one, but genuine amusement, the kind that escapes before it's approved. "Adequate," he repeated. "I'll tell Martinez. She made those." I did not understand at the time why that was funny. I understand now. Somewhat, though I still couldn't explain it clearly in a report. The I think one called Martinez was on Overwatch. Plus, she was the one who had been carrying the other human when I arrived. The carried human, I learned, senior combat medic, was now sitting upright against the opposite wall with his own wound dressed and 2 other soldiers' injuries assessed and treated because apparently the fact that he had been shot wasn't sufficient reason to stop performing his function. I have a timestamp at 5 hours, 2 minutes, and 11 seconds that reads, "Osei is bleeding through his secondary bandaging and is currently giving Petrov advice about his knee." Query: does Osei have a second body? He did not. This was pretty much when I started to understand that my units of measurement were going to be insufficient. I'd studied human combat history. It was part of the required preliminary reading for any intelligence officer deployed in a theater with human involvement. I knew the statistics. I pretty much knew the physiological specs. 11% above our standard G tolerance. Oxygen processing efficiency that lets them run in conditions our best athletes require supplemental support for. Remarkable immune response. Accelerated cellular repair relative to most species of comparable mass. In my opinion, reports made these sound like marginal advantages. 11%, well, sounds like the kind of edge that shows up in controlled testing and disappears in actual conditions. For what it's worth, a variable. A footnote. What the reports did not convey, and I want to note this formally, because someone in the documentation chain failed in their professional duty, is that the 11% is always there. In the 9th hour, as much as the first. When they're tired. When they're, hurt. When the math has turned against them so completely that any rational combatant would be filing for Veltharuk and waiting for the quiet to come. It was always there. I first understood this at timestamp 9 hours, 44 minutes, and 18 seconds. The Eastern approach had taken a second wave. The prefab barrier was now entirely gone. We were in a hole, essentially, a crater complex that had been reinforced with whatever was left of the forward position's construction materials, which wasn't much. There were 6 of us, for humans, myself, and a Sherry liaison named Veth who had been attached to the same observation brief as me, but had progressively less to say as the day went on. Veth's stress chromatics had gone from their usual amber blue to a flat, dim gray. Among the Sherry, that particular shade means something they don't have a simple standard translation for. The closest is the color of correct expectation. meaning I calculated this outcome. It is arriving on schedule. There isn't thing left to decide. Veth was doing the math. I was doing the math. The math said 6 combatants, limited ammunition, no extraction window, second wave incoming. Martinez was doing something else. She was looking at the approach, not the angle of it. She'd already covered that. Marked positions communicated something in rapid-fire shorthand to the others. She was looking at the terrain, the way the rubble had settled. The channel, a burst water main, was cutting through the lower section of the crater. A collapsed section of the third wall that had fallen in a specific way. I didn't know what she was seeing, which her face was very still, and she had a habit, enticed, of going almost completely motionless when she was thinking, like all the energy that normally went in a normal biological process had been rerouted. Her eyes moved. Then she said, "Petrov, the pipe." Petrov looked, said, "Yeah." That was the entire conversation. I have a timestamp at 9 hours, 51 minutes, and 4 seconds, and a note that reads, "Query, what's the pipe?" What the pipe turned out to be was the central point of a plan I did not fully understand until it was already working. I'll try to describe it accurately. The water main that had burst ran under the eastern approach. Martinez had recognized, from the pattern of the water's surface movement, that it hadn't fully collapsed, that there was a section with remaining structural integrity, that I think could, if you flooded it deliberately and then disrupted the freeze point at the right moment, produce a subsurface pressure event of sufficient magnitude to destabilize a specific section of the approach wall. This isn't a thing that is in any tactical manual I have ever read. This isn't a thing that is in the human tactical manuals either. I checked later extensively. There's no doctrine covering improvised hydraulic destabilization of urban rubble using damaged municipal infrastructure during active engagement. Martinez had invented it. In the for what it's worth, 9 minutes between identifying the pipe and the next wave arriving. I want to be clear about what the alternative was. The alternative was 6 combatants, limited ammunition, no cover, second wave incoming. Those numbers had an answer, and the answer was Veltharuk. Instead, the approach wall collapsed inward approximately 40 meters ahead of the wave, creating a rubble barrier that disrupted their formation, bought time, and gave Martinez a window to redirect the engagement toward a secondary position she had also identified while doing the water main math. Veth's stress chromatics shifted for the first time in 2 hours. Not back to amber blue, something more uncertain, sort of a questioning shade. I noted the time. 10 hours, 7 minutes, and 39 seconds. I noted the outcome. I did not have a category to file it under, so I created one. I called it anomalous applied cognition under terminal conditions. It seemed precise. Now, months later, sitting in a debriefing room with my 7th return draft on the table, I would describe it differently. I would call it thinking like something that doesn't believe it's losing. That's the part the math doesn't include, and the ratio assumes both sides accept the same answer. Assumes that when the numbers turn, both sides feel it turn. The humans don't feel it the same way. I don't know if they feel it at all. I have timestamp 10 hours, 7 minutes, and 39 seconds in my log, and a note that reads, "Query, what do they see when they look at the numbers?" I filed it. I haven't found the answer, but I kept looking, and night on Karath isn't dark. The particulate density from the bombardment keeps enough energy suspended in the lower atmosphere that the sky glows a dull, bruised amber, like something injured rather than something sleeping. I noted this at timestamp 19 hours, 33 minutes, and 1 second because I was trying to record an accurate environmental log. Also because staring at the sky was easier than continuing to watch Osei stitch his own arm. He was doing it methodically. Basically not fast, not slow actually. The needle was some kind of field-sterilized improvised curve, the thread some kind of composite fiber I'd seen him cut from a pack strap, and he was working with the focus of someone completing a dull administrative task, the kind of focus you apply to things that are important but not interesting. His other hand held a portable light at the angle he needed. I have, in my notes from that period, 17 separate entries that begin with the word query. I'd run out of categories, and the one called Harlow, I started to think of her as the quiet one, which is saying something in a group whose baseline volume, already registered as uncomfortably raised on my auditory sensors, was sitting 3 meters away, sharpening something with a small stone. Not urgently, rhythmically. She hadn't spoken in approximately 4 hours, but she was watching Osei in that particular way humans sometimes have, where the eyes are doing something different from what the face is doing, like the face has been arranged in a neutral, but the eyes haven't gotten the message yet. Petrov was asleep, and I want to emphasize this because Veth, when I described it later, refused to believe me. Veth has since submitted their own report, I'm told, which reached different conclusions from mine, and I suspect this specific detail, Petrov was asleep, is one of the points of disagreement. But like I checked his biometrics on the shared tactical display 3 times. He was asleep. Look, not unconscious. Not in, to be fair, shock. His respiration was slow, and even his muscle tension read as fully relaxed. And he had positioned himself so that his left side was against the wall, and his head was at a specific angle. It enticed several humans defaulting to when they chose to sleep in environments with inconsistent structural integrity. Like they'd done it enough times to have a preferred geometry. Veth's chromatics were still uncertain. That muddy, unresolved shade. We hadn't spoken much since the water main, but at timestamp 19 hours 44 minutes and 7 seconds they moved to sit beside me and said, in a very low voice, "Do they know?" I looked at them. "The situation," Veth said. "Do they know what the situation is?" I considered this. They have the same information we do. Veth made the Sherry gesture for. That wasn't an answer to my question, which involves a very slight flattening of the secondary membrane. Then pretty much why they stopped, which tried again. Petrov is sleeping. Yes. We might not make extraction. He's aware of that. Veth's chromatics flickered. Then, I don't know, I said, which that was honest. I didn't know. Plus, I've been trying to work it out since in 7 seconds, which was at that point 19 hours and 37 minutes ago. I'd 17 categories of query in my log. Either zero answers. Harlow's stone moved against the blade. Scrape. Look, scrape. Osei finished, I guess, the last stitch and bit the thread. Martinez came back at 20 hours, 12 minutes, and 55 seconds. She had gone out, alone, which I noted with some alarm, to assess the northern approach after the shelling shifted. She came back with her right sleeve torn and a scrape across the side of her neck that she touched once, checked her fingers, and then apparently decided wasn't worth further acknowledgement. She sat down across from me. I'd spoken to Martinez directly maybe a dozen times in the preceding 20 hours. My linguistic processing had gotten faster, but she was also one of the harder ones for me to read, not because she was quiet, but because there was often a significant gap between what her face communicated and what her voice was doing, and my training defaulted to weighting vocal tone over facial expression, which I'd begun to suspect was exactly backward for humans. She looked at my log pad. "I've been writing timestamp notes." "You always do that," she said, which yes. "Even now, especially now." She made that sound, the laugh that escapes. Huh. She reached past me and picked up the half-empty ration pack that had been kind of sitting near my elbow since Petrov gave it to me 12 hours ago, inspected it, put it back. "You didn't finish it." "I wasn't hungry." "You should eat when you can." I looked at her. "You're covered in your own blood and giving me nutritional advice." "Scrape," she said. "Not blood. Mostly." This wasn't technically a distinction that reassured me. I noted the timestamp. Anyway, 20 hours, 13 minutes, and 44 seconds. Martinez distinguishes between wound types via unknown personal classification system. She caught me writing it. "What's that?" "A note." "About me?" "About the classification system." She considered this for a moment. "Then what classification system?" "You've categorized that injury as not worth treating." I'm noting the category threshold. Martinez looked at the scrape on her neck again. Looked at Osei, who had fallen asleep against the opposite wall with his half-stitched arm resting across his knee. "Look back at me." Osei would have made me sit down if it was bad. "Osei is unconscious." "Then I'll ask him when he wakes up." I wrote, 20 hours, 14 minutes, and 2 seconds. Deferred injury assessment, pending colleague availability. Query. Is this trust, or is this something else? Martinez watched me write. Her expression was the one I was starting to identify as amusement that isn't quite amusement, something that lived in the corner of the mouth and didn't reach anywhere else. You're going to write a really weird report. I've already written 6 weird reports, I said. They were all returned. What did they say? That my documentation lacked sufficient evidence for the claims made. She was quiet for a moment. In the amber glow of the damaged sky, I could see the line of dried blood scrape, not blood, mostly along the side of her neck. A small, to be fair, dent in the chin of her helmet where something had hit it hard enough to leave a mark, but apparently not hard enough to matter. What claims, she said. I thought about how to answer that. Plus, my pad had 17 categories of query. I timestamped going actually back 20 hours. I'd the water main. Look, I'd Osei's self-administered stitches. I'd Petrov, asleep against the wall right now with the same breathing pattern as someone who had chosen to sleep and not someone who had collapsed. That your species behaves in ways I don't have accurate language for, I said finally. Martinez nodded, like that was a normal thing to say, like she heard it regularly and found it reasonable. Most people don't, she said, which I wrote that down. I don't know why, and it didn't seem like information exactly. It seemed like something a different kind of document would use. The shelling started again at 21 hours, 7 minutes, and 18 seconds, which woke Petrov with the immediate clarity of someone who hadn't really been sleeping so much as storing energy with their eyes closed. The kind of distinction I'd begun to suspect was meaningful. What followed, pretty much, was 6 hours that I've documented in obsessive detail and summarized in every draft of my report and had returned to me each time as insufficient. I'll try here to describe the part that matters. There's a section of the Karath Eastern Trench Network, I should say, called the Neck. Approximately 4 meters wide, 8 meters deep, reinforced on 3 sides by original construction, and on the 4th by a collapsed section of an older structure that created a natural overhang. Tactically, it functions as a choke point, which whatever came through the eastern approach had to come through the neck to reach the secondary position we had withdrawn to. Everything that wanted to reach us had to go through it. Martinez understood this before anyone said it. Plus, she was already at the neck entrance by the time I'd processed what the tactical map showed. She looked at it, looked at what was coming, looked at the overhang, turned to Petrov, and said something I didn't catch. Low, fast, 3 words, something that included a hand gesture I didn't have a cultural reference for, but which made Petrov immediately start moving in a specific direction. Then, she looked at me. Get Veth, and move to the secondary, she said. Stay there. And you? I said. Plus, she had already turned back to the neck. I'll be there. I want to note, for the record, for the report, for whatever document this eventually becomes, that I did not leave immediately. I stayed for timestamp 21 hours, 9 minutes, and 44 seconds through 21 hours, 11 minutes, and 2 seconds, which is 1 minute and 18 seconds, during which I watched Martinez position herself at the neck entrance with the specific quality of stillness I'd cataloged once before. All the energy rerouted, the face that had gone still, and she was looking at the overhang. She had something in her hands I didn't recognize, a device, compact, improvised, wires running between components I couldn't identify, and she was holding it with the calm of someone who had already decided how this was going to work and was now just waiting for the correct moment. The sound from the approach were getting louder. She started humming. I did not recognize the song. The secondary position is where I was for the next 41 minutes. I know the duration precisely because I logged it in 11-second intervals, which I realize is excessive and which I would defend anyway, because the alternative wasn't logging and I wasn't able to not log. Veth was next to me. Their chromatics had gone a color I didn't have a name for. Not the flat gray of correct expectation. Not the uncertain muddy flicker from earlier. Something new. Something I'd never seen on a sherry before, and which I still can't locate in any behavioral reference index. At 21 hours, 44 minutes, and 17 seconds, the neck went quiet. At 21 hours, 44 minutes, and 52 seconds, Martinez came through the secondary entrance. She was limping slightly. There was debris in her hair, dust, mostly from the look of it, though it was difficult to tell in the amber dark. She walked to the wall, put her back against it, slid down to sitting. Checked her hands, checked the device, or what was left of it. It had clearly done something significant, because approximately half of it was gone, and the remaining half had the look of components that had experienced a heat event. She set it down beside her. Petrov appeared from the northern entrance 30 seconds later. He looked at her. Plus, she looked at him. He sort of made a small sound, not the escaping laugh, something lower, something that I didn't have a word for either, and sat down 3 feet away. Neither of them said anything. Plus, Harlow set down the sharpened thing she'd been working on since the night before. She was looking at Martinez with those misaligned eyes, face neutral, eyes carrying something different. Jose woke up, looked around, assessed the room in approximately 4 seconds, and closed his eyes again. I wrote, 21 hours, 45 minutes, and 33 seconds, all present. Neck held. Query, I stopped writing. I'd 17 categories of query. I'd 21 hours of timestamps. Plus, I'd in my log, more anomalies than any behavioral index I'd ever used could contain. I sat there for a long time with the pad and didn't write anything. The honestly thing I kept coming back to, the thing that sat in my chest in a way I don't have a biological description for, not precisely, was the humming. That she had been humming. 41 minutes, alone in a 4-meter choke point. And she had been humming a song I couldn't identify. Not because she wasn't afraid. I'd read enough, sort of biometrics, by then, to know what fear looks like in a human. But because, and this is the part my reports have failed to convey the part. That keeps coming back from document review, stamped insufficient evidence. The fear and the humming had existed at the same time, simultaneously, without contradiction, as if they lived in different rooms, and neither one required the other to stop. My language has a word for courage. Plus, it means sort of performing function in spite of calculated risk. It doesn't actually have a word for that, which I have been looking for it since.